There is one reason why the Star Wars saga spawned trilogies of trilogies, toys and merchandise, and theme park attractions around the globe. We want to forever dabble in the world of Star Wars in all kinds of ways because of one pivotal moment from the original film when Obi-Wan Kenobi reveals,
"The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together."
Without that provocative line, Star Wars is simply another wacky science fiction product of the 70s. When you really think about it, the separate storytelling pieces of Star Wars are quite nutty little bits without the Force binding it all together in an interesting way. What gives the Star Wars universe its decades-long staying power is the concept of the Force. The idea that an energy field, generated by all living things, surrounds us, and we can harness it. As soon as we heard that in the film, it resonated within our soul. We felt it to be true. And while we may not be able to levitate rocks just yet, those of us that have been living purposefully have experienced the Force before, in one way or another. Stories that last for generations do so because they illuminate nuances of life at their primal core. The more primal the story is, the more popular it typically becomes. What is a primal core? At our most primal core, we exist simply to eat, survive, and procreate. Life in a nutshell. From these three necessities, our brains evolved to solve every obstacle we ever encountered to eating, surviving, and procreating. And while ego has us thinking we've evolved a great deal from our cave person days, the truth is that our basic brain functioning operates pretty much the same way today. Our brains learned to prioritize what we see and hear, create patterns about that information, and thus make sense of our surroundings. Whether we are conscious of it or not, every moment of every day has us interpreting sights and sounds and then simplifying that data in our heads so that we can identify threats and opportunities. In other words, we are continually weighing the good and the bad and balancing those forces in a risk versus reward kind of calculation before deciding our next step in life. Reminding us of this survival necessity, the creators behind Star Wars conjured up a world where both the good and bad characters use the same force, and the stability of the entire universe of the film hinges on finding a balance in that force. While Jedi Knights represent humanity's more selfless traits, Sith Lords embody our selfish tendencies. Yet both opposing forces use the same belief system to achieve their goals. In this way, the film's storytellers are suggesting that living our best life requires internally balancing our selfless and more selfish human traits. The Force is also referred to in Star Wars as an ancient religion. We discover that characters practiced the ways of the Force for ages past, but that knowledge eroded over time, just as knowledge can die out or become corrupted in the real world. Which is precisely why the Star Wars saga opens with the prompt, "A long time ago." It's an acknowledgement of this pattern of discovery and decay that seems to be at the heart of the human condition. The concept of a cosmic force in the real world can be traced back to our philosophically minded ancestors from the East. The Force is a primary belief system in Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. In fact, the theory that an energy field, that is the central mechanism of all living things in the cosmos, emerged in the 5th and 6th centuries. An ancient philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu wrote about this principle in a Taoist book titled The Way. It was a gift he bestowed to the Chinese people, revealing a universal energy force they could harness to improve and empower their lives. Disney's acclaimed spin-off series, The Mandalorian, borrows from the title of Tzu's book by echoing the line, "This is the way," through the character of the Armorer. Not coincidentally, I might add, Mando is paired on a series of adventures with the child, who happens to be gifted with the power of the Force. In bringing these characters together, the series' writers are representing Mandalorian code as harmonious with the ways of the Force. Thus, both characters become protectors of one another, and together, they overcome great obstacles. It was also a Taoist belief that our world must strive to balance opposing forces as nature's way within the material cosmos. This idea eventually found its way into Buddhist philosophy in India in the mid-millennium BC. Buddhism emphasizes meditation with a specific focus on relaxing the mind, tempering humanity's tendency toward racing thoughts. This is why several scenes in Star Wars key on harnessing the power of the Force through meditation. Luke is even scolded for his racing thoughts and is encouraged to focus more on the present instead of preoccupying his mind with the future or past. Not bad advice for all of us to consider to relieve stress and improve our psychological well-being. The Force in Star Wars also dovetails with Hinduism in a provocative way. A Hindu story called the Song of God, composed around 2000 BCE, offers us the first literary tale to focus on a relationship between master and disciple. Star Wars lore closely mirrors this interaction with a master and apprentice relationship becoming a recurrent theme throughout. Additionally, the Hindu text emphasizes training the mind to be disciplined, especially with regard to attachment and fear. It is Luke's attachment to his friends that Kenobi admits he is concerned about when Luke decides to abandon his training with Yoda. And fear is consistently brought up as a clear path to the dark side in Star Wars. My favorite master and apprentice kind of relationship is between parent and offspring, which brings us to the true life story of Michael Murphy and his father. Michael's father owned an old Victorian home in the Hudson River Valley region of New York in the early 90s, and every weekend for decades, his dad would chip away at all the necessary home renovations and repairs. Their house was built by a prominent American architect, Horace Trumbauer, who was known for designing lavish, extravagant residential manors, and later designed much of the campus of Duke University. So Michael's father had good reason to salvage this historical residence. But in 2004, Michael's father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and his condition deteriorated rapidly. At only 52 years old, he was given just 3 weeks to live. It was then that father and son banded together to continue repairing and restoring the home for the scant few days Michael's father had left on this earth. They stripped away 100-year-old wallpaper and repaired floors in the attic. And while feverishly working on these tasks and more, concentrating on the here and now, forgetting about a past diagnosis and a future end, 3 weeks turned into 3 months. Then into 6 months. Then the summer came and went. Restoring no less than 50 intricately paned windows, Michael's father was now in full remission, to the absolute surprise of his doctors. Working on that house and closely bonding with his son saved his life. Michael came to the realization that the spiritual connection we have to the places that we live in is only made manifest in that daily toil and daily maintenance and restoration. That the ritual and the practice of participating in creating the conditions for our family to live safely is a part of the human condition. 4 walls and a roof can provide shelter, but also comfort, inspiration, and sustain us. Spaces can give us meaning and purpose, and in the act of inhabiting a particular space, perhaps a part of our essence attaches itself to that place, and that force can be drawn upon to nourish and heal us. That discovery set Michael on a new path in life, into architecture, to build structures that had the power to heal. And while we will discuss in a future episode how the locations and set pieces of our personal story have an integral part in advancing and enhancing our journey through life, I want to stick to just the healing aspect of the Force for now, because this is what you need to immediately see positive change in your life. I can speak from personal experience and attest to this as I was recently diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease. After initially getting better on medication, I found myself in the hospital 5 times in 2 months because my body started becoming allergic to the drugs. I almost passed out while driving to work, felt like I was dying much of the time, and saw no clear path toward getting better. So I did a bit of desperate research and found an author by the name of Anthony William. Anthony had written a provocative and to some controversial book on thyroid healing. As I was formulating my thoughts for this episode, I found parallels between his healing style and the principles behind the Force. In particular, toward the end of his book, as he discusses a technique for thyroid relief, Anthony mentions infusing your drinking water with what he calls healing light. Essentially, you pour yourself a glass of water and partake in a short ritual, infusing the water with healing energy, changing its chemical structure so that it becomes a transformative tonic. Now, if this isn't using the Force, I don't know what is. And I must admit, this book, along with herbal remedies and a healing diet, all work toward alleviating my symptoms, slowly reversing my condition to where I feel stronger and more normal by the day. So I have witnessed firsthand the power of mind over matter and how that affects one's ability to recover from illness. And to add insult to injury, over half of what Anthony said I needed to do to regain my health, I had learned about 10 years earlier when struggling with digestive issues. The hustle and bustle of life caused me to bury that knowledge so deep I had forgotten about it, and I eventually fell into bad habits that brought on a new and more difficult problem to treat. For me, the heart of the Force is mindfulness. Practicing mindfulness can increase our productivity, creativity, and ability to regulate our emotions. It can also decrease stress, anxiety, and depression and help those suffering from long-term health conditions. In a 2020 study, researchers found that undergraduate students practicing mindfulness techniques were less stressed from not only a psychological standpoint, but also a physiological one. In 2019, another study teaching children mindfulness practices before an approaching hurricane made them less prone to post-traumatic stress disorder in the wake of that storm. Thus, mindfulness has been shown to help us manage existing stress while shielding us from future problems. And there are cognitive benefits as well. The best way to boost your brain power is via mindfulness techniques. Your sleep and memory will certainly improve. In fact, the authors of a study in 2016 found that even just a 3-minute session of mindfulness reduced false memory recall from eyewitness statements in court. Deeper research into the physical benefits of mindfulness has confirmed an improvement in telomerase activity. This crucial enzyme controls cellular aging, which suggests mindfulness keeps us young while combating disease. No wonder Yoda's species lives so long. I wonder where they got that idea. And in a study involving women in the early stages of breast cancer, mindfulness reduced fatigue, sleep disturbances, and optimized their immune system. Practicing mindfulness can even positively rewire our brain. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, researchers found that mindfulness changed activity in the brain's insular cortex. This part of the brain is connected with decision-making and sensory processing, so we can use mindfulness to improve our functioning at work, while learning, and at play. For instance, taking a walk or jog with mindfulness in mind tends to inadvertently provide us with new insights for tackling existing problems. Now, do you remember when Kenobi sensed the destruction of Alderaan when he said to Luke,
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
if the Force is all around us, emanating from all living things, we face a perilous dilemma allowing the destruction of our forests and species. As life dies around us, so does the Force. Its power wanes. Ironically, as life often is, we have a collective duty to keep this universe and this planet and all its inhabitants alive and well if we want to achieve our individual best. Now, before you head off to meditate under a tree, when was a time you felt or used the power of the Force? Tell me about it in the comments, won't you? Until we meet again, be well, do extraordinary things, and may the Force be with you, always.